The air inside the courthouse was thick with tension. The grand marble pillars and polished floors reflected the authority and prestige of the judicial system. But for some, it was nothing more than a fortress of exclusion. A tall black man in a well-tailored but simple black suit approached the entrance. His steps were measured, calm, and deliberate. His dark brown eyes scanned the area as if assessing every detail with precision. There was no arrogance in his demeanor, only quiet confidence. As he stepped forward, a uniformed security guard moved in front of him, blocking his path. The guard, a burly man with graying hair and a sneer permanently etched on his face, looked the stranger up and down before crossing his arms. "Court's in session," the guard said flatly. "Only those involved in cases are allowed inside." The man remained silent for a moment, studying the guard. Then, he reached into his pocket and retrieved a neatly folded document. Without a word, he extended it forward. The guard snatched the paper from his hand with an exaggerated sigh. But instead of reading it, he glanced at it briefly, scoffed, and, without hesitation, ripped it in half. "Whatever this is," the guard said, his voice dripping with disdain, "it doesn't matter. This courtroom isn't for people like you." A few passers-by paused, watching the exchange with hushed curiosity. Among them was a young lawyer, barely in his 30s, dressed in a crisp navy blue suit. He had been walking towards the courtroom doors when he witnessed the entire scene. Shaking his head, the lawyer sighed. "You'll never win your case, not in this court." The black man's expression remained unchanged. He didn't argue. He didn't react. He simply exhaled softly and walked past the guard as if the insult had never been spoken. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as spectators filled the rows of wooden benches. The scent of polished wood and aged paper filled the air, and the soft hum of whispered conversations created an atmosphere of anticipation. At the front of the room, the judge, a stout, balding man with a reputation for being particularly dismissive, sat in his high-backed leather chair, tapping his gavel lightly against the desk as he prepared for the proceedings. As the black man stepped inside, all eyes turned toward him. A ripple of confusion spread through the room. He walked with an air of quiet authority, yet no one recognized him. No lawyers flanked his side, and there was no indication of who he was or why he was there. The judge raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "You're the defendant?" he asked, barely suppressing a chuckle. The man did not respond immediately. Instead, he moved toward the front of the room, adjusting his suit jacket as he did. The prosecutor, a seasoned attorney with a reputation for aggressive cross-examinations, smirked. "No lawyer," he said mockingly. "You actually came here thinking you could defend yourself?" The spectators chuckled, and even the judge shook his head in amusement. "Sir," the judge said, now looking down at the man with condescension, "I assume you understand that legal proceedings require proper representation. You're entitled to a lawyer. Do you wish for the court to appoint one for you?" The black man remained silent for a moment before reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small, sealed envelope and placed it on the judge's desk. A second judge, an older, more experienced man who had been observing from the sidelines, leaned forward as his eyes caught sight of the seal stamped on the envelope. His reaction was immediate. His face paled, and he sat up straighter, his mouth slightly agape. The prosecutor's smirk faltered. The spectators quieted. Even the judge, previously so confident, hesitated before reaching for the envelope. When he flipped it open and read the first few words, the color drained from his face. His hands trembled slightly as he continued reading. The envelope contained an official appointment letter from the White House. The judge swallowed hard, his confidence crumbling. This is, his voice trailed off as his gaze darted back to the man standing before him. The prosecutor, now visibly uneasy, leaned over the desk to peer at the document. As his eyes scanned the words, his face turned ashen. "This is impossible," he whispered. The black man reached into his pocket once more and retrieved a polished badge, setting it carefully on the desk beside the letter. The engraved words gleamed under the courtroom lights. "Chief Justice of the Supreme Court." Silence. Not a single word was spoken. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The same security guard who had torn up the letter at the entrance shifted nervously near the back of the room, his hands trembling. The man finally spoke, his voice even and authoritative. "I'm the one you just dismissed at the door." The prosecutor took a step back. The judge, now visibly flustered, cleared his throat but failed to form a coherent response. A court official, standing near the jury box, turned to a colleague and whispered, "That's him. The new Chief Justice, just appointed last week." A ripple of gasps filled the room. The judge stumbled over his words. I didn't know. We were just following protocol." The double doors swung open. 2 FBI agents strode in, their presence commanding immediate attention. The lead agent held a folder in his hands and spoke firmly. "Your Honor, we have a warrant." The prosecutor visibly tensed. "A warrant?" he asked, voice cracking slightly. "For who?" The agent's eyes locked onto the judge. "For you." The courtroom erupted in stunned whispers as the FBI approached the bench. The newly appointed Chief Justice remained where he stood, unmoving. He had already known how this would end. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the courtroom. And as he did, the entire room watched in silence, some in awe, some in shame, but all with newfound understanding of exactly who they had just tried to humiliate. The courtroom remained frozen in silence long after the newly appointed Chief Justice had left. The tension in the air was suffocating, thick with disbelief and shame. Some of the spectators still hadn't fully processed what had just happened. The judge, once smug and dismissive, now sat rigid in his chair, beads of sweat forming on his brow. His hands gripped the arms of his chair as if grounding himself to reality. The prosecutor, Richard Calloway, could barely keep his composure. His fingers trembled as he clutched the edges of the desk. He had spent his career belittling defendants, especially those who lacked legal representation, but never had he misjudged someone this disastrously. The silence was broken by the commanding voice of the FBI agent standing at the front of the room. "Richard Calloway," the agent said, holding up a legal document. "You are under investigation for judicial misconduct, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of bribery." The prosecutor's face drained of all color. This is a mistake," he stammered. "You don't understand. I was just..." The lead FBI agent nodded to his colleague, who stepped forward and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Save it. You'll have plenty of time to explain yourself." Gasps filled the room. Lawyers, journalists, and court officials whispered to one another in hushed tones. The same prosecutor who had sneered at the man without legal representation was now being taken into custody. The judge, still seated, looked as though he had aged 10 years in the past 5 minutes. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his gavel, trying to reclaim some sense of authority. "This is outrageous," he blurted out, though his voice wavered. "You can't just..." The FBI agent turned to him. "Actually, we can." A second file was placed on the desk. The judge hesitated before reaching for it, his fingers stiff and unwilling. When he opened it, his face twisted in horror. The documents inside detailed a federal corruption probe, one that had been active for months. It exposed a network of judges and prosecutors who had accepted bribes in exchange for favorable rulings. Cases had been manipulated, defendants coerced, and innocent people convicted without just cause. And his name was all over it. "You're under investigation as well, Your Honor," the agent said, his voice devoid of emotion. The judge's face contorted in desperation. "I didn't," he stopped himself. There was no excuse he could give. The courtroom doors opened once more. This time, federal officers entered, their presence shifting the energy in the room completely. "Remove him from the bench," the agent ordered. The judge's protests died in his throat. He stood, his movements sluggish, like a man walking to the gallows. As the officers escorted him from the room, he glanced at the spectators, his former colleagues, fellow legal professionals. Many of them now looked away, unwilling to meet his gaze. For years, he had been untouchable. Now, with a single letter and a badge, everything had changed. The Chief Justice stepped into the daylight, the crisp autumn air brushing against his face. He exhaled slowly, loosening the tension in his shoulders. He had expected resistance, had known that walking into that courtroom without introduction would reveal the true nature of those within. And they had failed the test spectacularly. A low murmur rippled through the crowd gathered outside. Reporters and journalists, having caught wind of the unusual courtroom events, were already assembling with cameras and microphones. A young reporter, her press badge barely glinting under the noon sun, rushed forward. "Sir, Chief Justice," she called out breathlessly, "could you comment on what just happened inside?" He turned to face her, his expression composed. "Justice happened," he said simply. The cameras flashed. Another reporter pushed forward. "Did you anticipate this level of discrimination when you walked into that courtroom today?" The Chief Justice studied the reporter for a moment before answering. "I anticipated the truth would reveal itself." More murmurs. The energy in the crowd was shifting from curiosity to admiration. A familiar voice cut through the noise. "You planned this, didn't you?" The Chief Justice turned slightly, seeing the young lawyer from earlier, the same one who had shaken his head at the courthouse doors, doubting his chances. The lawyer's expression had changed. He no longer looked amused or dismissive. Instead, there was something like understanding in his gaze. The Chief Justice gave a small nod. "I gave them every opportunity to do the right thing. They chose otherwise." The lawyer exhaled, running a hand through his neatly combed hair. "I've worked in this system for years," he admitted. "I've seen judges ignore due process, prosecutors bend the law to fit their narratives, but I never thought I'd witness something like this." The Chief Justice tilted his head slightly. "And now that you have?" The lawyer hesitated. Then, he squared his shoulders. "Now, I know what I need to do." A small smile played at the corner of the Chief Justice's lips. "Good." The lawyer extended a hand. "Benjamin Carter," he introduced himself. "And for what it's worth, I was wrong about you earlier." The Chief Justice took his hand, shaking it firmly. "I don't need apologies, Mr. Carter. I need allies." Benjamin nodded. Just then, the doors of the courthouse swung open again. The former prosecutor, Richard Calloway, was let out in handcuffs, his expression a mixture of rage and humiliation. The cameras immediately turned toward him, reporters shouting questions that went unanswered. Following closely behind was the disgraced judge, his face hollow, his fate now uncertain. The Chief Justice watched as they were both placed into separate federal vehicles. Justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about change. And today, the system had been forced to reckon with itself. Turning back to the press, the Chief Justice spoke one final time. "This isn't the end. This is just the beginning." The cameras flashed again. The news would spread like wildfire. And somewhere, in the very halls of power where corruption had once thrived, people were beginning to realize. A new era of justice had arrived. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. Though the dramatic arrests had concluded, the energy outside remained electric. Reporters scrambled to update their news feeds, witnesses murmured amongst themselves, and legal analysts speculated on the broader implications of what had just unfolded. Inside his private office, Benjamin Carter sat at his desk, his mind still replaying the day's events. The Chief Justice's words echoed in his head. "I don't need apologies. I need allies." He had spent years navigating the legal system, towing the line between justice and survival. He had seen corruption, but had never dared to challenge it head-on. Now, as he watched footage of the courthouse incident on his laptop, he realized there was no going back. A knock at his door broke his thoughts. "Come in," he called. The door swung open, and to his surprise, the Chief Justice himself stepped inside, still dressed in the same simple black suit from earlier. He closed the door behind him and regarded Benjamin with a calm but knowing expression. "You look like a man deep in thought," the Chief Justice observed. Benjamin let out a breath and gestured to the chair across from him. "Have a seat. I assume you didn't come here just to check in on me." The Chief Justice smiled slightly and took the offered chair. "No, I came because I believe we have unfinished business." Benjamin arched an eyebrow. "Unfinished business?" "You saw firsthand how deep the corruption runs," the Chief Justice said, leaning forward. "Today was just a single courtroom, a single prosecutor, a single judge. But this is systemic, Benjamin. It won't stop unless people inside the system decide to change it." Benjamin ran a hand over his face. "I get that. But what exactly are you proposing?" The Chief Justice reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a neatly folded document. He placed it on the desk between them. Benjamin hesitated before picking it up. As he unfolded the paper, his eyes widened. It was a federal investigation directive, signed by multiple high-ranking officials. "This is," Benjamin trailed off. "The first step," the Chief Justice confirmed. "There are others, other judges, other prosecutors, entire networks built to exploit loopholes, silence the vulnerable, and maintain power. And I need people like you to help bring them down." Benjamin exhaled sharply, running his fingers along the edge of the document. And if I say no? The Chief Justice studied him carefully. Then nothing changes. Benjamin chuckled dryly. No pressure, huh? No pressure, the Chief Justice agreed. Only choice. Benjamin leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. I've spent years playing it safe. Watching people like Calloway manipulate the system, letting bad judges get away with decisions that ruined lives. And I told myself I couldn't do anything about it. He looked back at the Chief Justice. But today, I watched a man walk into a courtroom, say nothing, and still bring an entire corrupt network to its knees. The Chief Justice nodded. Because justice doesn't always need words. Sometimes, it just needs the right people in the right places. Benjamin tapped his fingers against the document. Then, he gave a firm nod. I'm in. A rare smile crossed the Chief Justice's face. He extended a hand, and Benjamin shook it without hesitation. A new battle had begun. Richard Calloway sat in a cold, dimly lit interrogation room, his wrists still bound in handcuffs. The once proud prosecutor now looked small, his carefully maintained arrogance stripped away. The door opened, and two FBI agents stepped inside, their faces unreadable. One of them dropped a thick folder onto the table. Let's talk, the agent said. Calloway swallowed hard. He knew what was coming, and for the first time in his career, he was the one on trial. The walls of the interrogation room were cold, sterile, and suffocating. Richard Calloway sat with his hands cuffed to the metal table, his suit now wrinkled and damp with sweat. The fluorescent light above flickered slightly, casting a dim glow over the folder the FBI had just dropped in front of him. Across the table, Special Agent Daniel Pierce, a seasoned investigator with piercing gray eyes, leaned forward. His partner, Agent Maria Lopez, stood with her arms crossed near the door, watching Calloway like a hawk. We can do this the hard way or the smart way, Pierce said, tapping the folder with his index finger. Your choice. Calloway licked his dry lips. This is ridiculous. I was just doing my job. Pierce raised an eyebrow. Your job? You mean fabricating charges, manipulating evidence, and ensuring verdicts that lined your pockets? Calloway scoffed, but his eyes betrayed his fear. You don't have anything on me. Lopez pushed off the wall and strode to the table. Don't insult our intelligence, Calloway. This investigation has been going on for months. We've got financial records, witness testimonies, and enough evidence to bury you for the rest of your life. Pierce flipped open the folder, revealing a stack of neatly organized documents. See for yourself. Calloway hesitated before glancing down. His blood ran cold as he skimmed the contents. Bank transactions linked to offshore accounts. Wire transfers. Correspondences between him and judges regarding favorable rulings. This, he clenched his jaw. This doesn't prove anything. Lopez leaned in. It proves enough. Pierce let the silence hang before speaking again. Here's the deal, Calloway. You're not the only fish in this pond. We know you were working with others, judges, law enforcement, politicians. Give us names, and maybe we can work something out. Calloway exhaled sharply, his mind racing. He had always been the one with leverage, the one with power. Now, he was just another pawn in a collapsing empire. He looked up at Pierce, his voice barely above a whisper. What kind of deal? Pierce smirked. Now you're thinking smart. The Chief Justice sat in his newly furnished office, the towering bookshelves behind him lined with legal tomes and case law records. The desk before him was covered in documents, investigative reports, and classified files related to corruption in the judicial system. A knock at the door. Come in. Benjamin Carter entered, carrying a thick folder. He looked more determined than ever. Calloway is cracking, Benjamin said, placing the folder down. He's given up 3 judges and a handful of prosecutors. It's worse than we thought. The Chief Justice picked up the folder and flipped through the pages. His eyes darkened as he took in the names. This is just the beginning, he said. For every name we uncover, there are 10 more operating in the shadows. Benjamin sat across from him. So what's the plan? The Chief Justice closed the folder and set it aside. We keep going. We dismantle this system from the inside. No shortcuts. No compromises. Benjamin exhaled, shaking his head. You know they won't go down without a fight. A small smile played on the Chief Justice's lips. Neither will we. Inside a dimly lit private club, 3 men sat around a polished oak table, their expressions tense. They were all high-ranking officials, judges, corporate executives, and former politicians, men who had benefited from the very system now under scrutiny. They took Calloway, one of them said, swirling a glass of whiskey. It won't be long before they come for the rest of us. Another man, a federal judge with silver hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward. We need to control the narrative. If we let them dictate how this plays out, we're finished. A third man, wearing a perfectly tailored suit, smirked. Then it's simple. We strike first. A heavy silence followed. Then, a slow nod of agreement. The war for justice had just begun. The city skyline glowed under the night sky, its towering structures a symbol of power and prestige. But beneath the polished exterior, a battle was brewing, one that would determine the future of the very system it upheld. Inside his Supreme Court office, the Chief Justice sat at his desk, reviewing the latest updates on the corruption probe. A dim desk lamp cast a warm glow over the neatly stacked files in front of him. Each document contained names, judges, prosecutors, law enforcement officers, individuals who had abused the law for personal gain. A soft knock at the door broke his concentration. "Come in," he said. Benjamin Carter entered, looking tense. He placed a folder on the desk and took a deep breath before speaking. "We have a problem," Benjamin said, his voice low. "Calloway's testimony has been leaked." The Chief Justice's eyes darkened. "To whom?" Benjamin hesitated. "The media, but also to people who don't want this case to see the light of day." The Chief Justice leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in thought. "That means they're preparing to fight back." Benjamin nodded. "They won't just let this happen. They're going to discredit the investigation, bury evidence, maybe even intimidate witnesses." He hesitated before adding, "They could come after you, too." The Chief Justice gave a small, knowing smile. "I expected nothing less." Benjamin shifted in his chair. "So what do we do?" The Chief Justice flipped open the folder, scanning the contents. Then he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small, encrypted flash drive. He slid it across the desk toward Benjamin. "We go public first," the Chief Justice said, "before they can twist the narrative." Benjamin picked up the flash drive, eyes narrowing. "What's on this?" "Everything," the Chief Justice replied. "The entire case, the financial records, the bribery evidence, the testimonies. Verified and indisputable." Benjamin let out a low whistle. "If this gets out, it'll bring down half the judiciary." "Exactly," the Chief Justice said. "But we need to be strategic about it. We can't just release it blindly." Benjamin nodded. "I know a few journalists who are still willing to fight for the truth. We can make sure this information reaches the right hands." "Then do it," the Chief Justice said. "And be careful. They won't take this lightly." Benjamin stood, gripping the flash drive tightly. "Neither will we." Inside a private boardroom, a group of powerful men gathered. The mood was tense, the air thick with cigar smoke and whispered conversations. At the head of the table sat Judge Warren Mitchell, one of the most influential figures in the legal system. His silver hair and sharp eyes gave him the air of a man who had spent decades wielding power, and he had no intention of losing it now. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth but firm, "we have a situation." The others at the table exchanged wary glances. "The new Chief Justice is digging too deep," Mitchell continued. "He's exposing names, unraveling deals that have stood for years. And if we don't stop him, everything we've built will come crashing down." A younger man, a high-ranking corporate lawyer, leaned forward. "We could try to discredit him. Question his past, his credentials." Mitchell smirked. "Already in motion." Another man, a former senator, exhaled slowly. "And if that doesn't work?" Mitchell's smirk faded. "Then we take more permanent measures." A heavy silence followed. Finally, someone spoke. "Are you suggesting we remove him?" Mitchell swirled his whiskey glass. "I'm saying we do what's necessary to protect our interests." Another long pause. Then, a slow series of nods. The battle lines had been drawn. The morning air was crisp as the Chief Justice stepped out of his home, the weight of the moment pressing down on his shoulders. He had been in high-stakes battles before, but this was different. This wasn't just about a case. It was about dismantling a system that had thrived on secrecy and manipulation for years. Benjamin Carter was already waiting by the car, gripping a briefcase tightly. Inside was the flash drive, the key to exposing everything. "You ready?" Benjamin asked. The Chief Justice nodded. "Let's end this." They got into the car and pulled away from the quiet neighborhood, heading toward the press conference that would change everything. Judge Warren Mitchell adjusted his cufflinks as he sat in a dimly lit office, the tension in the room palpable. Across from him sat a man known only as Holloway, a fixer, someone who made problems disappear. "You understand the assignment?" Mitchell asked, his voice calm but firm. Holloway smirked. "Loud and clear." Mitchell nodded. "Good. Make sure it looks like an accident." Holloway stood, buttoning his coat. "By the time the sun sets, your problem will be gone." As he left the office, Mitchell exhaled slowly. He had spent decades building his empire, and he wasn't about to let some idealist tear it all down. The Supreme Court building was surrounded by reporters, cameras flashing as the Chief Justice and Benjamin arrived. Security was tight. There had been whispers of threats, but neither of them would back down. As they stepped up to the podium, the crowd quieted. The Chief Justice adjusted the microphone and spoke clearly. "For years, corruption has been allowed to flourish in our courts. Today that ends." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Benjamin handed him a folder, and the Chief Justice held it up. Inside this folder is evidence that exposes judges, prosecutors, and politicians who have abused their power. "This is not speculation. This is fact." Gasps erupted as he continued. "We are handing this over to federal authorities, and from this moment forward, every corrupt official will be held accountable." Just as he finished speaking, a loud pop echoed through the air. Panic spread as security rushed forward. The Chief Justice remained standing, unharmed, but the sound had come from the far end of the crowd. A man was tackled to the ground, a weapon clattering from his grip. Benjamin exhaled sharply. They really tried it. The Chief Justice turned to security. "Get that man into custody. I want to know who sent him." As the would-be assassin was dragged away, the Chief Justice faced the cameras again. "They think intimidation will silence us. They are wrong." The crowd erupted into applause. Judge Mitchell, watching from a private lounge, clenched his jaw. The attempt had failed. And now, war was inevitable. The failed assassination attempt had only strengthened the Chief Justice's resolve. If anything, it confirmed what he had known all along. His enemies were desperate, willing to do anything to silence the truth. As the press conference continued, security tightened around the Supreme Court. The captured gunmen had already been taken in for questioning, and within hours, federal investigators had begun connecting the dots. The evidence provided by the Chief Justice was already in motion, and the walls were closing in on those who had built their careers on corruption. Judge Warren Mitchell paced inside his luxurious study, his usual air of confidence slipping. The room was dimly lit, the scent of expensive cigars lingering in the air. The men who had once looked to him for leadership now sat in tense silence, their faces lined with concern. "The hit failed," one of them muttered. "And now they're coming for us." Mitchell slammed his glass down onto the table. "They were always coming for us. We should have moved faster." A man sitting in the corner, a high-ranking corporate lawyer, sighed heavily. "We still have influence. We can push back, delay the investigations, tie it all up in legal battles." Mitchell shook his head. "No, you don't understand. This isn't some political scandal we can sweep under the rug. The Chief Justice has the public on his side now. He's made this a war." "And what do we do?" another man asked, his voice shaking. "We can't just sit here and wait to be arrested." Mitchell exhaled slowly. "We cut our losses, burn whatever connections we have left, hide assets, and leave before they can make their move." A heavy silence followed. Then, as if on cue, boom, boom, boom. The loud knocks at the front door made every man in the room freeze. The butler hesitated before opening it. "FBI. Federal arrest warrants. Stand down immediately." Within seconds, federal agents flooded the estate. Mitchell barely had time to react before handcuffs were locked around his wrists. "You have no idea what you're doing," he spat. One of the agents smirked. "Actually, we do. You're under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, and obstruction of justice." As Mitchell was dragged out, cameras flashed, reporters shouting questions. The empire he had built for decades had collapsed in a single moment. The Chief Justice stood in his office, watching the news unfold. The arrests were being broadcast across every major network, exposing the corruption for the entire nation to see. Benjamin Carter entered the room, a satisfied grin on his face. "It's over." The Chief Justice gave a small nod. "No, this is just the beginning." Benjamin exhaled. "You think more of them are out there?" There will always be those who seek power for the wrong reasons, the Chief Justice said. Our job is to make sure they never succeed. Benjamin smirked. So what now?